Hello friends and welcome to my channel. December always reminds me of Charles Dickens and Victorian Christmas traditions. The book Christmas Carol was first published in 19th of December in 1842 and it was sold out by Christmas Eve. By the end of the following year, already 13 editions had been published, and since then the book hasn't been out of print. The first Finnish translation came out in 1878, and if Wikipedia is to be believed, it has been followed by 7 other translations. My book is a translation of Jukka Torvinen from the year 1986. This book brings me nicely to my project, as it brings us to 1840s. 1840s started the look that most think when they think Victorian. Big voluminous skirts, narrow waists, dropped shoulders, simple cuts. After all that craziness that was 1830s fashion, watching these pictures makes me feel lightheaded. 1840s fashion abandoned the over-the-top decoration, huge gigot sleeves and eccentric hairdos. The dresses became more modest and practical. During the first years, a wide neckline was still common in daywear, but as the decade progressed, the daytime necklines became smaller. Bodices were form-fitting and often came to a point at the center front. The fitted shape was created with princess seams or with gatherings and pleats. The skirts were simple rectangles cartridge pleated to the waistband. The shoulder seam was dropped, which created a fashionable rounded shoulders look. Sleeves could be tight or loose, and they often had some ruffle decoration. I bought this pattern designed by Angela Clayton. It is modeled after this Met dress with some deliberate differences. With short sleeves, it is not really fit for the Finnish winter, but I figured I could modify the sleeves. I started by making a quick mock-up of the bodice. The size 12 was fine at the waist, but too big at the bust. The easiest way to fix the fit was to take a long vertical dart away from the center front, tapering to nothing at the waist level. Normally, I always have to add room for my shoulders, but this time the fit was perfect. I got this checked cotton poplin from Estonia. I got 5 meters of it, and it was just enough. However, I must admit that I didn't notice the tiny paw prints on the fabric when I ordered it. Those aren't really historical, but luckily you don't really notice them unless you stare at the fabric at close. My daughter says that the paw prints are like little Easter eggs in the costume. I bought green cotton bias tape for the piping. To make sure that my piping doesn't shrink later, I soaked the piping and the cotton piping cord in hot water and then hanged them to dry. I normally trace my patterns, as it's easier to keep the original pattern and make modifications to the copies. However, I have never understood the need to make patterns out of rectangular pieces. In Finnish sewing patterns, the rectangular pieces are usually given measurements and you can just cut the pieces without pattern. With a checked fabric like this, I can just follow the lines on the fabric. I start by sewing the 3 skirt pieces together with French seams. That way I can get the big pieces out of my way and make sure that I don't mistakenly cut into them. I left 2 openings to add pockets later if I had fabric left after making all the essential parts. The back seam was left open at the top and a continuous placket was sewn to the opening. To make the cartridge pleats, I sewed 2 rows of gathering stitches by hand. When both rows align, you get these beautiful even gathers. I stroke the gathers with a needle to neaten the gathers further. Now, I can take my pre-shrunk materials for the piping and sew the cord into the bias band. During this project, you will see me experiment with different pressure fit to deal with the piping. Usually the zipper foot is recommended, but my zipper foot doesn't let me sew close enough to my taste. so I usually use buttonhole or applique feet that have space underneath for the piping, and adjust my needle position so that the stitching line goes right next to the piping cord. Then there was more gathering to do. The center front piece is gathered with 5 rows of gathering stitches. The piece is then sewn onto the lining. The lining has a seam in the middle. The seam allowances are folded down to make channels for the boning. I didn't have any boning in my storage, so I used cable ties that worked just fine. Now I can adjust the front piece gathers until the front fits onto the lining piece. Next, it is time to sew the bodies together. The front piece is first sewn to the side pieces. Then we can pipe this edge that joins to the yoke. I sew the yoke on along the same line that I sewed the piping on. The princess seams are piped and then sewn. And here I'm sewing the shoulder seams. Now that the bodice is all in one piece, I can pipe the lower edge. To make the piping go neatly around the pointy bit at the front, I cut a few notches to the seam allowance. Okay, now you have probably seen enough piping, so let's jump forward a bit to the sleeves. I have to draft long sleeves, and for that I found help from the book Making Working Woman's Costume. I chose the sleeve pattern, the width of which matched the sleeves on my dress. The original sleeves flare a bit. I decided to keep the flare on the top sleeve, but take it out from the lower sleeve. I continued the lower sleeve pattern, but still left the horizontal seam to keep the ruffle in its original place. Here I'm adding the seam allowance that I forgot to add to my drafted part. Now I can cut the sleeves and the ruffles. I don't have that much fabric left, but there is enough. The ruffles are just long rectangles. With the second set of ruffles I ran out of fabric and I couldn't cut them in the same direction. Luckily I had these long vertical pieces left, so I cut the last 2 ruffles vertically. The waistband is made out of cross-grain ribbon. I hemmed the edges, adjusted the gathers, and then basted the waistband to the skirt. This is how far I got yesterday. So I have the bodice that is just pinned on this mannequin, like so, and it still lacks sleeves, but I have cut the sleeves, so that's good. And it seems to fit pretty well. There is still room here for me to close it. So this looks quite okay. Although I'm not sure how this underwear will fit underneath, because these corset straps keep peeking out. But perhaps I will add some kind of loops here to keep them in place. But I'm not so sure about the skirt, because I'm afraid it might be a little small. So let's try it out now with the proper underwear. Yesterday I tried it on without this corset and it was way too small. So before I actually stitch it on, it's now just basted on. I want to see whether it will fit. Let's see. Closure will be at the back, but yeah, it is too small. It says 8 centimeters. So I add 8 centimeters, so it will surely fit. Well, good that I didn't actually sew it on yet. So I had to cut the new waistband. Good that I only basted the first one on. Now, after another fitting, I can sew the skirt to the waistband. I do this by taking a stitch through each of the gathers. The next day was so beautiful. It had snowed overnight and the back forest had turned into a winter wonderland. I had to take a walk before taking up my needle again. Now after my walk, I can start hemming the ruffles. This took ages. Then I could construct the sleeves. I struggled with the piping. I didn't like the way the pattern instructions told to handle the start and the finish of the piping. I tried to be smart about it and of course made a mess. However, even after fixing my mistakes, I think that the way the piping is instructed to be sewn on is not the easiest one. The easiest way would be to sew the sleeves into tubes and then add the piping. That way you don't have to be so accurate with where you start and end your piping. With the ruffles in place, I sewed the sleeves to the bodies. Only here I'm constructing the lower sleeves. The bodice needs a lining. Some years ago I cut a cotton lining for a skirt but made a mess with the grain lines or something. Now I can use those old skirt pieces to cut my lining. I sewed the lining together and now it's time to attach it to the bodice. I align the main seams and then start carefully pinning down the edges. I may have mentioned before in previous videos that this is always my favorite part in sewing, seeing all the ugly raw edges disappear. There is one thing that the lining needs before I can attach it, and that is some boning. I seem to have tons of underwire casing for bra making, and I realized that that made perfect casing for my zip type boning. With the boning attached, I can finish with the lining. At this point, I wanted to add the hooks and bars to be able to try the bodice on before attaching it permanently to the skirt. The pattern instructions call for hooks and bars, but I have never seen small hooks and bars like that for sale in Finland. The only hooks and bars we have are the big and bulky ones that I used for trousers and skirts. However, it wasn't really hard to modify the basic eyes. What I did was to first open up the eye a little bit. Next, I shortened the wire on the loop. I then took round pliers and made a new loop like this. Now I just needed to make a total of 9 bars. I tried the bodice on with my corset and it fitted. So I can now sew the bodice to the skirt. I stitch just between the piping and the bodice where the stitching line is hidden. I stop before I get to the curved part as I don't want to force the gathers into a unnatural position. Then I stitch the other side the same way. The back slit of the skirt gets 2 sew-on snaps to keep the slit neatly closed. I didn't add any pockets when I sewed the skirt. Now I have just enough scraps left that I can add pockets. However, I don't have fabric to waste, so I must pay attention to the amount of fabric I have left. Okay, my first pocket draft was clearly too big, so I'm making a new draft that hopefully will now fit. I can now cut the pocket pieces. I cut the side with the pocket opening in 2 parts. I first sew the outer parts together so that I left an opening in the middle. Then I sewed the pocket pieces together with the French seam. These kinds of pockets are easy to add to the existing seam, even with the machine. Although one must be careful not to sew into the back of the pocket while sewing it to the skirt. Now the dress only needs a press and it is ready. I also made some very necessary winter accessories for this dress, but those will be in the next video, so don't forget to subscribe. Thank you so much for watching and see you soon. Bye!